Hi, I'm Bart Welling at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville. I'm in the English department, and welcome to Humanities on the Brink. We're in the ancestral homeland of the Mocama people, and right now I'm with my daughters at a place called the Willie Brown Trail. You can see how the Mocama ate countless millions of oysters, and when they were done, simply dumped the shells and created these large middens. We're actually on top of a kind of bluff now that overlooks the marsh, which built up over hundreds and thousands of years as people ate oysters and dropped them here. And I like coming here for a lot of reasons. It's a quiet place, a beautiful place in a bustling city. It's one of my favorite trails in the area. But it also reminds me that the emergency we're talking about in this conference didn't begin 10 years ago or 20 years ago or at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. It's at least 500 years old, and it's still going on. And this area is called the First Coast. I don't know if that nickname was invented for tourists or who came up with it, but this is where the Spanish in the 1560s established the first permanent European colony in what became the United States. St. Augustine, erroneously known as the oldest city in the what is now the United States, was established in 1565. French settlers, Huguenot Protestants fleeing persecution, tried to establish a colony right around here, a few miles from here, but they were massacred by the Spanish and their attempts were thwarted. But it reminds me when I come here that the past is a lot closer than we think it is. I also like to think about the future when I come here, because this area was donated to the federal government by a man named Willie Brown. Could have easily been developed, but he chose to preserve it. And over time, it's been basically re-inhabited by lots of wild animals and plants, and it's a very popular place for people to get some peace and quiet in the city. And I think about the future that we want to have, the future that we can have if we transition successfully to new ways of life. And I get a little glimpse of that future when I come here. Admittedly, as Matt Hearn and Amjo Hall point out in their excellent book, Global Warming and the Sweetness of Life, A Tarzan's Tale, emergency is a highly problematic term. Authoritarians love nothing more than to declare emergencies as a way of seizing power and limiting the freedoms of citizens and the media. Of course, we've seen that lately with the pandemic. Hundreds of studies by terror management theorists have shown that when faced with the prospect of a life-threatening emergency, people tend to fall back on the cognitive and cultural frameworks that they have grown most comfortable with. As one terror management scholar pointed out to me recently, the frameworks that most people in the developed world are most comfortable with revolve around consumerism. So the more scared people get about global warming, the more shopping we can expect they will do. Not the best response to a crisis largely caused by consumerism. But if the typical environmentalist uses of emergency and apocalyptic rhetoric are barely getting any traction these days, that doesn't change the fact that non-human beings and people everywhere already find themselves in the midst of a set of cascading, mutually amplifying processes of ecosocial extinction, marginalization, and immiseration, processes that any reasonable person would be hard-pressed to find a better word for than emergencies, as fossil fuel-powered cultures, or petrocultures, keep cranking Earth's thermostat higher and higher, and the forces of white supremacy, anti-intellectualism, and illiberal democracy appear to rage out of control. By the way, let's not forget that enough active nuclear warheads are still sitting on missiles kept on hair-trigger alert status to wipe out most life on the planet. Is it time to panic yet? My hope is that the symposium's collective response will be a resounding no, if for no other reason than that authoritarians love the idea of panic as much as they love the idea of emergency. Nor, however, do I believe that it's time to manage our own terror by retreating further and further into the so-called ivory tower. As we're all painfully aware, that tower rests on intellectual and institutional foundations that have gotten shakier than ever, and it is steadily being dismantled to make room for something more like the biblical Tower of Babel, a loose collection of disciplines united too often only by their mutual unintelligibility and by a shared commitment to furthering petroculture's impossible, and indeed suicidal, mission of forgetting and transcending the multi-species kin networks that have always made human life possible and given it meaning. But enough with towers. Let's talk about gardens. While the humanities in general were busy chopping down trees for paper upon which to print ever more esoteric articulations of human exceptionalism, many of us, and I most definitely include myself in this category, forgot to educate ourselves and teach others about the vital caretaker responsibilities to which, like it or not, our ancestors committed humanity starting hundreds of thousands of years ago. But I am persuaded by Robin Wall Kimmerer and many other great theorists and poets of non-human relationships that it is not too late to begin relearning what these responsibilities entail, a project that we can only carry out in partnership with each other, with scholars in other disciplines, with people outside the academy, and with our non-human kin. In fact, call me hopelessly naive, but I am still weirdly hopeful that if enough of us embrace this effort, the humanities could experience a renaissance rather than an extinction event. Yes, the UN official who described an intergovernmental panel on climate change report as a, quote, deafening, piercing smoke alarm going off in the kitchen was correct. As energy humanities scholars and eco-critics and other concerned humanists, we should be sounding the sirens as loudly and effectively as we know how. But given that our current emergencies have been building for the span of over 500, or perhaps over 10,000 years, we surely have a little time to slow down and think as clearly as possible now about how to prepare for the fast emergencies that are on their way. One unexpected advantage of the nearly carbon-neutral format of our symposium, for me, is that the asynchronous nature of the panels frees all of us up from the feverish rush to cram our heads full of libraries worth of ideas and names and books over a few days' time. Just think, not only are none of us dealing with the debilitating effects of flygskam, Swedish for flight shame, or worrying about whether we were exposed to the coronavirus on the way here, but we can pause talks in the middle to take a break, rewind, fast forward, ponder. We can jump from panel to panel without spilling anyone's coffee. So I hope we can all take advantage of this opportunity to ponder how the humanities can be repurposed, maybe even reborn, in the process of helping transform an age of emergencies into an age of emergence, the emergence of a world that we will recognize when it comes, because we have been trying to live there all along. Thank you. Thank you to everyone, and I really look forward to the conversations we're going to have in this symposium.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jordan Kinder, one of the co-organizers of Humanities on the Brink, and Shirk FRQSC postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Art History and Communication Studies at McGill University. I'm also a citizen of the Métis Nation of Alberta. I'm here to extend our welcome, to offer my own land and water acknowledgement from here in Tiohtià:ke, or what is now called Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and to briefly discuss how to get the most out of this conference with its multiple modes of engagement. So I did the majority of the planning work for this symposium in my home, a second-floor apartment in a 3-story row house that sits roughly 1.3 kilometers from the Lachine Canal in Saint-Henri, a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood once known primarily as a home to industry and those who were working in those industries, including a tannery and a site of production for vinyl records at the RCA building, which sits about 200 meters to my right. I orient myself in relation to the canal because of the central role that water occupies in this land's recent and deep histories. Like many waterways in what is now called Quebec and Canada, waterways both built and natural, the Lachine Canal is a site of settler colonial displacement and dispossession underwritten by the fur trade. I've recently arrived in Tiohtià:ke as an Indigenous newcomer of settler, British, and Plains Métis descent, with ancestral ties to the Willowbunch Métis settlement in southern Saskatchewan. I grew up on unceded Lheidli T'enneh territory and I called Treaty 6 territory home for 5 years as I did my PhD at the University of Alberta. My relation to land and water is conditioned by these past and present relations, and the work I do more generally aims to honor them. I've modified, revised, and rehearsed this acknowledgement throughout the quarantine to be drawn upon in virtual spaces such as these. There's a broader lesson here, I think, about the responsibility we bear for understanding the histories that have made our habitation possible in the first place. Responsibilities that have come into stark relief as we occupy spaces that we're often told are immaterial. So welcome, and thank you for participating in and contributing to this virtual symposium. The symposium has a few different modes of engagement that I'd like to outline briefly. The symposium is centralized on the website that has been put together at UCSB. Here we encourage you to view panels and presentations that interest you in the coming weeks, while also commenting on panels and papers. If everyone committed to offering commentary to at least one panel a week in this way, there would be a lot of productive activity and thinking. This is ultimately the asynchronous portion of the symposium. We also have a series of live special sessions and plenary events, including a collective screening of Invasion, a Q&A with Kim Tallbear moderated by myself, a collective conversation with Stephanie Lemanager and Jennifer Wenzel, and a closing social event. The best way to keep aware of these events and how to access them will be to subscribe to the Google Calendar, the link of which will circulate in the mass launch email. Live stream links, any changes or updates, and these sorts of things will first go through the calendar events, but we will stay in touch through email with any major announcements. Finally, to supplement the asynchronous conversation happening on the symposium website, we're planning on hosting informal sessions for each of the streams where we can connect and discuss the panels. More details will come on this front in the early days of the symposium. As always, reach out to one or all three of us if you're having any issues. Organizing in this way is conceptually and technologically new to the three of us, so we'll be troubleshooting ourselves along the way. Thanks again for your participation at a time when personal, political, and scholarly demands on all of us are multiple and uneven.
Hello, my name is Jacob Gosling, and I'm a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Literature and Languages at Christian Brothers University in Memphis, Tennessee. But today I come to you from the woods of northern Kentucky, which is where I grew up and where I've been living over the past several months while helping to organize our conference. A few hundred yards in the woods behind me runs the Ohio River. I bring this up to acknowledge that European settlers colonized this part of Kentucky and turned this land into a property that my parents would one day be able to purchase. Before then, the Adena, Fort Ancient, Miami, Osage, and Shawnee peoples lived and traveled along the same Ohio River, where I now hear cold barges and speedboats. This land has another history which is important to acknowledge, a history of slavery. My county is a border county and a border state, yet a majority of the white population here in the 19th century owned slaves in support of the Confederacy during the Civil War. Even though the so-called Free North sat just on the other side of the Ohio River, the land around me was once a site of unacknowledged terror for non-white people. In short, though the woods behind me seem quiet today, they have been impacted over centuries by the overlapping emergencies of settler colonialism and racial capitalism that persist today. Amid the urgent social and environmental crises we face as a society, this land has reminded me as I've sat out here on the porch organizing this conference how our emergencies are unevenly and unequally felt and often take place over long periods of time. I'll wrap up my introduction by extending a few thank yous to the people who've helped us out the past few months. First, we want to thank Ken Hiltner along with Baron Haber and Lydia Borowich for their technical support at the University of California at Santa Barbara, which is co-sponsoring this event along with ASLE. At ASLE, I want to thank the Executive Committee for supporting our vision for this virtual conversation. I especially want to thank Amy McIntyre for helping us navigate the past 6 months. I'd also like to thank Christy Tidwell and Bridget Barclay for setting such an excellent example for us to follow. We're also happy to feature several art pieces from conference participants on our website and in our program. Thank you, Michael Krawczyk, Andreas Rakauskas, Jacqueline L. Scott, and of course, Jordan Kinder. Michael and Andreas are also presenting on their work during our conference, so please be sure to check out their presentations if you're interested in their art. I'd also like to thank the plenary speakers for agreeing to contribute their thoughts, including Elaine Scarry, Kim Tallbear, Jennifer Wenzel, and Stephanie Lemanager. Finally, I want to thank all the participants who've directed their limited time and energy towards making this conference the engaging event we trust that it will be. The three of us have been looking forward to watching your presentation since we received your abstracts, and we can't wait to dive in. Thank you.